So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 19 Washington Square North, which is the home and intellectual center of NYU Abu Dhabi here in New York City. My name is Michael Pruganan. I'm a professor of biology here at the Department of Biology at NYU New York, and I also run a laboratory at NYU Abu Dhabi. I run the Date Palm Genome Diversity Lab here, and I started 2 years ago as the academic director of 19 Washington Square North. So over the academic year, we at 19 mount several public programs to introduce the public at large and the NYU community, and as I said, the general public, to experts to talk about a variety of issues and topics and give ideas and then tell us their ideas on several things. So we have public lectures, panels, workshops, and conferences here at 19. A key partner of ours at 19 is the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute in New York and Abu Dhabi, which mounts many of the public programs. And I'd like to thank the staff of NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, including Sharon Hakakian-Bergman, who's the Director of Research and Academic Programs, who mounts many of these public programs here. So today we're very, very pleased to see all of you here and welcome Farah Obaidullah, the founder of The Ocean and Us and the Women's for Ocean platform, as well as the editor of the book, The Oceans and Us. Farah holds degrees from Imperial College in London and has worked as an environmental consultant before redirecting her career to her passion for the ocean. For the past 20 years, Farah has dedicated herself to protecting the world's oceans, and among her achievements, Farah has executed campaigns to end destructive fishing, worked with affected communities, lobbied for ocean protection, including the new treaty to protect life in the high seas, and been deeply involved in exposing fish crimes, such as illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, slavery, and labor abuse at sea. Farah is currently campaigning for a moratorium on deep-sea mining. Farah's book, The Ocean and Us, explores all the ways our lives interact with the ocean, and which I think she will discuss with us today. Again, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you here this afternoon and to welcome Farah to the podium.
Thank you. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute for hosting me today.
Just that might be something.
Sorry, is it?
Yeah, adjust.
Oh. Okay. So there's some slides up on here, but they are just for illustration as I talk. I'm not going to be pointing at any slides, so they'll be going in loop. So yes, my name is Farah Obaidullah. I founded The Ocean and Us, a registered nonprofit in the Netherlands, as well as the Women for Oceans Foundation platform, which is about elevating women and the feminine perspective in the ocean space. And I'm also the editor of the recently published book, The Ocean and Us, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge all the lives everywhere affected by war. And it is my strong belief that by restoring nature and rediscovering our place in the natural world, we will find more respect for one another. If we don't have respect for each other, it's very difficult to respect our natural world. As the saying goes, you can judge a character by the way they treat animals, and this can be extended to the natural world and all life. How we treat the natural world around us is a reflection of how we treat each other and ourselves. But I'm here to talk about the ocean, why a healthy ocean matters, and in particular, I will discuss the high seas, the deep sea, and the Ocean Hope Project, which is my current initiative to connect people to the ocean and to stop deep sea mining, which is an impending disaster, from starting. And I hope that the talk offers new insights and also piques your interest. And if you have any questions, I'm trying to keep the talk brief because I would love to have a discussion or questions around what I'm talking about. But just coming back to the ocean means different things to each one of us. Each one of us sees the value of the ocean and therefore the approach to protecting it differently. There is no one size fits all. And I've worked in many different organizations around the world, including Greenpeace International, and Seas at Risk, and the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, various nonprofits that have different approaches. And I truly recognize that you cannot just impose one way of thinking to different communities, different cultures, different sectors of society, and so on. And if there's one thing that I've learned over 20 years of campaigning for ocean health, it is that we have to feel connected to the ocean in order for us to care. We only protect what we love and what we feel connected to, and we only love or feel connected to what we know. And this is why bringing in diverse perspectives is so important, so we can reach as many people as possible. What is important to me about the ocean is different to you, but one thing is common. We all need healthy oceans, whether it is to stabilize our climate, feed our family, or out of our ancestral and cultural heritage. So let's explore the ocean. We know that the ocean covers 70% of the planet and that it provides 90% of the planet's habitable space. We know that the ocean gives us life. Much of the oxygen that we breathe is actually produced in the ocean. The ocean provides us with food, jobs, and well-being. And importantly, the ocean regulates our climate. You know, when we talk about the climate crisis and all the extreme weather events and everything else, we often forget that it's the ocean that drives these weather events. Everything that happens in the ocean impacts us on land. And as we talk about heat waves and breaking record temperatures on land, in fact, over the past year, every single day we've seen temperature records break in the water, in the ocean. But we also know that the ocean is in serious decline. Climate change, overfishing, and pollution are all wreaking havoc to life in the oceans and its ability to carry out the functions that sustain life as we know it. For example, did you know that most of the world's fish stocks are either fully fished or overfished, or that 1 in 5 fish are caught illegally, or that a staggering 10 to 15 million tons of plastic enters our ocean each year? And that the oceans are warming, they are acidifying, and they are losing their oxygen content as a result of climate change. Corals, one of the most iconic forms of life in our ocean, are set to almost completely disappear by the middle of this century. That's not very far anymore. And all of this is deeply depressing. I'm not here to depress people. And most people that I encounter want to know what they can do to change things. Just 10 years ago, ocean plastic pollution was arguably the only major issue that really sort of gained widespread attention and is how people engaged with ocean issues. And as a result, we are seeing commitments to curb the plastic crisis, although not nearly enough is being done. But the United Nations is currently negotiating a new and developing a new global plastics treaty. But the increasing challenges facing the oceans can no longer be left to scientists, conservationists, and activists alone. Just like a sinking ship requires all hands on deck, we must mobilize now to safeguard our ocean, which is quite literally our lifeline. And as our understanding of the ocean increases, so too do the opportunities for exploiting resources. So whilst you and I are grappling with these challenges, pollution, overfishing, climate change, and finding ways as ocean or nature lovers, scientists and environmentalists, concerned citizens, to do what is in our power as individuals to mitigate these problems by, for example, ditching single-use plastics, abstaining from seafood, or reducing our carbon footprints, there is a new threat that looms for the ocean: deep sea mining. And I'll get back to that in a moment. I first want to spend a bit of time on my favorite part of the ocean, which are the high seas. And this is quite literally the middle of the ocean. Those areas of the ocean that are beyond the national jurisdiction of any one country. The high seas make up over 2/3 of the ocean, which translates to almost half our planet. And I come from the Netherlands, where nearly every square inch of our country is managed. And so for me to think about half our planet basically not belonging to any one country and therefore being a sort of last frontier, wild frontier, it's baffling to me. And why is it my favorite part of the ocean? They belong to no one, and therefore they belong to all of us. As someone raised by parents from two very different cultures, having attended international schools and having had the privilege of traveling around the world, I feel connected to the high seas. Just as the high seas are international waters, so too am I an international citizen. But I've also spent time roaming the high seas, and I've experienced firsthand what the challenges are of governing this vast area of our planet. The high seas are largely ungoverned. They are like the Wild West of the ocean. Sure, there are a patchwork of instruments and organizations aimed at managing some of the activities on the high seas, such as regional fisheries management organizations or the International Seabed Authority or the International Maritime Organization. There's several treaties, but they only deal with one activity and they don't necessarily cover that entire space, you know, of that half of the planet I'm talking about. There is no single comprehensive framework that protects life on the high seas. And yes, just last year, after 20 years of negotiations, we do now have a treaty designed for the sustainable use and protection of life, of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. But this treaty still needs to be ratified and before it enters into force. Moreover, the provisions of these treaty are such that they cannot undermine existing instruments, frameworks, and bodies. So it may still be a while before this new High Seas Treaty takes effect, and just how effective it will be determined, as always, by the political will of those in power. So what do I mean by the challenges of governing activities on the high seas? Well, remember, I just mentioned that 1 in 5 fish is caught illegally. Well, over the years, I've spent time documenting fish crimes at sea. What are fish crimes? They include a whole host of activities from fish and money laundering to human trafficking, labor abuse, and slavery at sea. But when we talk about fish being caught illegally, more specifically, we mean illegal, unreported, or unregulated fishing, otherwise known as IUU fishing. Illegal fishing quite simply means fishing in contravention of applicable laws regarding fish size, net size, area closures, and so on. Unreported fishing means just that, fish caught that is not officially reported anywhere or that is misreported. An example of this is high grading, where a vessel continues to fish beyond its quota in search of only the highest grade fish, replacing previously caught fish within that quota and then tossing or discarding the ones that they caught overboard, just to catch the most premium specimens. And then finally, unregulated fishing is all fishing that happens by vessels not bound by regional fisheries bodies, or in areas where no management regime exists, or by vessels that target fish for which there are no applicable rules. With the patchwork of instruments and the fact that not all countries are bound to fishing rules on the high seas, for example, if they're not party to that particular regional fisheries management organization, the high seas are a perfect playground for unregulated fishing and also for, for a whole host of fish crimes. The high seas are, there are no eyes or ears on the ground or on the water on the high seas, so it makes monitoring, surveillance, and enforcement very difficult in these vast areas. But importantly, there's also no accountability on the high seas. And let me explain what I mean. On one of my expeditions documenting fish crimes, our crew bore witness to a transshipment happening on the high seas in the central western Pacific Ocean, involving multiple catcher vessels and a reefer flag to Cambodia. So I'll just explain what transshipment is. Transshipment basically means the transfer of catch from one vessel to another. And usually this other vessel is a refrigerated cargo vessel or reefer. And this then facilitates continued catching of fish on the high seas, because that vessel then doesn't ever have to go to shore. They can just keep transshipping onto a vessel at sea. So we boarded and inspected this refrigerated cargo vessel to find that the captain kept no logbooks detailing the transfer of catch, how much, and from which boat. No crew manifests were available, and no details of who the ship, which ships or which vessels the cargo ship was actually offloading from. And I was used to boarding vessels with a bridge filled with high-tech screens and gadgets, radars, and so on. But this ship had the bare minimum: no screens, no gadgets. The captain held a handheld GPS, a global positioning system, and a satellite telephone. And he took orders from his boss on land, who just told him where to go, like the coordinates of where to go. And it was as simple as that. And these vessels are huge. I mean, we're talking like 100 meters or more of these cargo vessels. So they are they're not the small boats that you think about. They're massive cargo vessels, and their sole job is just to offload catch from vessels operating illegally. So just to illustrate the ship's hold, and I think there's a slide up there which shows a pile of tuna going by, and that was actually taken in that hold. But the ship's hold was the size of about a basketball court, several meters high, and 3/4 of it was full of tuna, mostly skipjack tuna, but also some yellowfin, and there was an albacore. But there was no way of knowing where the fish was caught or by whom. The fact that we were on the high seas and that the reefer was flagged to a country that was not a member of the Western Central Pacific Fisheries Commission, the body that regulates tuna fishing in that area, made it impossible for us to alert anyone with authority. The closest terrestrial waters was actually Palau, and for the entire expedition, we had Palauan enforcement officers on board, even while the incident was unfolding. And so I made a call to the Attorney General Office of Palau, and as expected, Palau, although willing, was powerless to act. I made the point that the ship would be passing through Palauan waters on its way to the Philippines, and still Palau was unable to act. We trailed the ship for a few more days and witnessed it change its name. They had also conveniently covered their IMO number, and this is a number that is unique to the vessel and should not change, even if the name of the vessel changes or the flag of the vessel changes. So this is a unique number that needs to stay the same throughout the lifetime of the vessel, but they were just changing it in front of our eyes. But this case illustrated all too well the lack of governance on the high seas and the desperate need for better international cooperation. We had all the information about the vessels in question, including visual evidence of transshipment, lack of proper catch data, and documented the overt change of name, as well as the dumping of fuel at sea. We knew where the ship was destined for, and yet there was nothing we could do and no one we could alert to stop this illegal catch from entering the global tuna market. And such stories, unfortunately, abound on the high seas, and it is for this reason that I am truly terrified about the emerging threat of deep sea mining. So what is deep sea mining? Do people know here what that is, more or less? All right, good. Deep sea mining is a destructive extractive industry that doesn't yet happen on the high seas, but it is quite literally the practice of mining the seabed for minerals. And if allowed to go ahead, there's a very real risk that this could happen in the next couple of years. Deep sea mining will cause irreversible damage to life in the deep sea and risks disturbing locked away carbon. The ocean is the world's largest carbon sink, and most of that carbon is locked away in the seabed. And sending gargantuan machines to the bottom of the ocean to strip mine it for minerals is quite literally an experiment in ocean chemistry we cannot afford. So let's explore the deep sea for a moment. The deep sea is defined as the ocean below 200 meters and can extend for kilometers down, so many miles down. The deepest point being the Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean at some 11,000 meters below the surface. I'm not good with the miles conversion, but that's 11 kilometers, which is about maybe 6-7 miles or so deep. Something like that. The deep sea makes up 90% of the volume of the ocean and 95% of the Earth's livable space. And most of the deep sea is in the high seas, so those areas beyond national jurisdiction. So given this vast size, it is no surprise then that the deep sea boasts also a wide range of topographical features, including mountains or seamounts, far taller than the tallest peaks on land, as well as gullies and underwater hydrothermal vents, and of course, a wealth of undiscovered life. The deep sea has largely remained undiscovered because technology is only just advancing to allow us access to explore it. In fact, 99% of the ocean is yet to be discovered, but there may be as many as several millions of species living down there. What we do know about the deep ocean is that it is rich in biodiversity and that life in the deep sea is extremely vulnerable. That's because under such enormous pressure, with no light, life is very slow growing and very slow to reproduce. Fish such as orange roughy can reach over 200 years old and only reach sexual maturity at around 30 years. You may have heard of the Greenland shark, a deep sea shark that can reach over 400 years old. Corals in the deep ocean can reach several thousand years old, and sponges can reach 10,000 years old. And speaking of corals, over half of the world's corals are actually found in the deep sea. So with life growing so slowly in the deep ocean, you can only imagine that it responds poorly to any disturbance. In fact, we know that when we cause damage to the deep sea habitat through, for example, deep sea bottom trawling, it will take decades, if not hundreds of years for life to return. We also know through studies published in 2021 that disturbing the seabed through bottom trawling, so that's when you drag these heavy nets over the seafloor, vast quantities of carbon are returned back into the ocean and then into the atmosphere. Some parts of the deep ocean are also rich in mineral deposits, and it is these minerals that are of interest to a handful of speculative miners or mining companies. These deposits essentially come in three forms that are interesting for miners. The polymetallic nodules found along the abyssal plains of the deep ocean. They are about the size of a lump of coal, and they sit on the seabed. They are rich in nickel, cobalt, and manganese. These nodules have taken millions of years to form and provide essential habitat for animals such as the Casper octopus, which lays her eggs around these nodules. The second type of areas of interest are the polymetallic sulfides from the hydrothermal vents. Deep sea hydrothermal vents support some of the most unique and ecologically important communities known to science. In fact, an enzyme isolated from a microbe found in a deep sea hydrothermal vent was used in the COVID-19 test. And the third type of deposits are the cobalt crusts found along seamounts. But it is typically the polymetallic nodules that are on the seabed that are of interest in the short term to miners, and specifically those in an area known as the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, or CCZ, in the Pacific Ocean. In fact, some of you may have read about the CCZ, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, in the news, and the fact that more than 5,000 new species were recently discovered in the area. Deep sea mining for the nodules involves strip mining the seafloor, essentially sucking up these nodules and leaving a wake of destruction in its path. Aside from the direct and immediate destruction to deep sea habitat, deep sea mining will cause plumes of sediment that will travel along the seafloor that will travel for miles beyond the actual mining areas. This suspended sediment risks suffocating life in the water column and also on the seabed as it settles down again. Just imagine it'll be like a dust storm underwater that is so slow moving, but that there's nothing to sort of slow it down either. So it will just continue on undisturbed for miles from the mining site. And also wastewater and noise pollution from deep sea mining will further impact the ocean, as well as light pollution. Remember, these areas have never seen light before, and suddenly we're going to send these big machines down there with massive lights lighting up the area. But what do I mean by wastewater? Well, as these nodules get sucked up through the water column, through these huge suction tubes, they're collected on board these processing vessels where they will be cleaned or processed. And then that wastewater, which is going to be laden with heavy metals, it'll be toxic, will just be re-released back into the ocean. And then again, so you have a secondary plume, which will then go through the ocean, through the water column. And what is essentially dredging the seafloor, collecting as much as 30 centimeters of the seabed, deep sea mining will disturb that locked away carbon. And that locked away carbon, as I was discussing, risks getting re-released into the water column. And even if you imagine that this is happening at very extreme, depths, and that it may take a very long time for that re-released carbon to come back into the atmosphere, in the meantime, it could interfere with the ocean's biological pump, as well as the carbon cycle in the ocean. And for example, it may worsen ocean acidification. So it would make sense, therefore, that before we decide to pursue such a high risk and irreversibly destructive new industry, that we at least understand fully what we are getting ourselves into. And this is exactly what scientists are saying. In fact, more than 800 marine scientists are calling for a pause to deep sea mining. I used to work as an auditor before I joined the ocean conservation community, and there is no way we are able to audit these depths, right? If you have a mine on land, I'm not defending the way we mine on land. That's, there needs to be a lot of improvements done. But at least these are areas where we can make improvements. We can set stricter regulations. We can regenerate areas. And they are discrete areas. Whereas in the ocean, there's currents that'll take, as I was saying, the dust plumes and the noise pollution, which noise travels much faster in the water. And you cannot go down there as an auditor with your board and check compliance at so many miles deep. And plus, these nodules have taken millions of years to form, so they will not return in our lifetime. We are currently living through the 6th mass extinction. We have already lost more than 2/3 of global wildlife. The climate and biodiversity crises are upon us. And now, as the world pours its attention to issues affecting us on land, such as war, energy, and the cost of living, this reckless industry is poised to take foot. And once it does, we will see a new gold rush begin, a race to the bottom of the ocean for minerals. So who is in charge of allowing this to happen or not allowing deep sea mining to happen in the high seas, which are our global commons? Well, there's this international organization called the International Seabed Authority, or the ISA, established under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And this body is tasked with regulating any future mining activities. And in doing so, it must ensure the effective protection of the deep sea, recognizing that the deep sea is designated as the common heritage of humankind. So the ISA has so far granted 31 exploration licenses, amounting to an area of 1.3 million square kilometers licensed to date. And there are a couple of aggressive companies sponsored by countries pushing to mine the deep sea at all costs. And as with anything and everything, once one country starts mining, then the floodgates open for all countries to mine, remembering that there are 31 exploration licenses. So if all those were to translate into exploitation licenses operating 24/7, 7 days a week, we're talking about an area of 10 times the size, more than 10 times the size of France. But momentum is rapidly building to stop this industry from starting. Frontline communities of where the industry wants to begin mining, Pacific Island communities, reject deep sea mining. Hundreds of NGOs and civil society groups are saying no to deep sea mining. The fishing associations are saying no to deep sea mining. The ocean community, from divers to surfers, are saying no to deep sea mining. And as of today, 25 countries, including Spain and many countries in the European Union, are calling for a moratorium on deep sea mining. And as I said, hundreds of scientists are calling for a pause to this industry. Even tech and electric vehicle companies and the finance sector are saying no to deep sea mining. Companies like BMW, Volvo, Volkswagen, Renault, Google, Samsung, Philips, and many more are rejecting the idea that we need minerals from the deep sea for our supply chains. They have the foresight to realize that trashing the seabed is not the way out of the climate crisis. Banks are also increasingly excluding deep sea mining from their investment portfolios. There are now some 37 financial institutions calling for a moratorium on deep sea mining. In short, there is no social license to mine the deep sea. And it's not that hard to imagine why. It's a reckless industry that has no place in the future we're trying to build for our collective good. One that is based on a circular, not linear economy, where take, break, waste is no longer the business model. And it is an industry that is easy to reject. It isn't happening yet. No jobs are at stake. But we know that once it starts, it'll be very difficult to stop or even regulate. How are we even going to audit this industry, like I was saying? Who has the jurisdiction or the money to go down several miles into the ocean depths to see if the miners are following the rules? And how will we regenerate these areas? Thinking back to my example of unregulated fishing, how are we going to hold companies and countries to account? Who will spend the political capital to uphold regulations in an area that belongs to no one? Because if something happens on the high seas, you need a country to take the perpetrating country to court, to, for example, the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. But which country is going to do that if it isn't about their own sovereign waters? that requires a lot of political will because there might be other trade agreements with that country. And so it's better to just turn a blind eye to what's happening on the high seas. We can't make the same mistakes as we have in our past. Look how long it's taking us to wean off of fossil fuels. And that's because for so long, governments and companies have argued that there is too much at stake, too many jobs, too much investment in infrastructure from extraction to distribution. And I get it, it's a gigantic ship to turn. But with everything we know about how destructive deep sea mining is, why even begin? And here's the thing, we don't need to. Those that want to mine the deep sea argue that we need the minerals found in the deep sea like cobalt, manganese, and nickel to power electric vehicles and our tech gadgets. But this argument is flawed. For one, there are enough minerals on land to meet the demand for metals. Even the industry says so. Although yes, we absolutely must improve the way we mine on land. But also, why aren't we recovering metals from our waste streams? Why are we dumping and incinerating waste that contains these precious metals? Why isn't urban mining a thing? One recently published study says we can meet up to 58% of our projected demand for metals just by recovering them from waste streams. Innovations such as bioleaching are already making promising breakthroughs in recovering metals from waste. So why aren't we investing in that? But probably the biggest argument for not needing these metals from the deep sea is because battery technology is evolving quickly. Big companies like Tesla, BYD, which is the world's second largest producer of electric vehicles, and Volkswagen are all demonstrating success in their batteries without the metals found in the deep sea. The companies that I mentioned earlier, BMW, Volvo, Renault, Google, Samsung, are thinking ahead and know that they won't be needing these metals for the batteries of the future. New technologies such as lithium iron phosphate, sodium ion batteries are already becoming mainstream. And with innovation happening rapidly, new chemistries are coming up. But time is running out to stop this industry. The good news is that because of pressure brought to bear by all of us, the Council of the International Seabed Authority decided to push forward a decision on whether to open up the deep sea to mining to 2025. And in this time, they hope to finalize what's called a mining code. This is good news because it means that our voices matter. We have agency to stop this industry, to stop this disaster from starting. And we must build on this groundswell resistance to deep sea mining and ensure that it is not allowed to go ahead. And this brings me to the Ocean Hope Project. So for the last 4 years, I've been campaigning against deep sea mining and for a moratorium. When I began working on this issue, there was no country, I believe, that was speaking out in favor of a moratorium on deep sea mining. Today, 25 countries are either calling for a pause or a moratorium or even a ban on deep sea mining. And last year, when I was traveling back from the international, when I was traveling to the UN right here in New York City, I launched a petition calling on world leaders to secure a moratorium on deep sea mining. And that petition got over 340,000 signatures in just the space of 4 or 5 weeks. And this was amazing, but not enough. We're not talking about deep sea mining that, in the way that we are about any other impending disaster. Why? Because it isn't happening yet. It's not interesting for media to cover because there's nothing to show. And it's also not interesting for governments since it doesn't concern their sovereign territory. It's not an election issue because it's not about our direct economies. But we have just 1 year to significantly increase support to stop this industry from starting. And so on my way back from the International Seabed Authority, which is in Kingston, Jamaica, last July, I thought about how we can make deep sea mining, or how we can make the deep sea, I should say, come alive for people. Because of all the ocean issues I've worked on, from overfishing, illegal fishing, pollution, whaling, climate change, you name it, deep sea mining is the most terrifying threat facing our ocean. The urgency of the campaign is real, and the window to stop this disaster is closing. If we think about the collective value of the high seas and the new era of colonialism and ecocide that deep sea mining in our global commons represents, it is clear to me that we simply cannot afford to let this happen. Let us for once consider the collective value of a natural system and truly protect something for the benefit of all of humanity. So the idea of the Ocean Hope Project was born. The Ocean Hope Project connects people to the ocean, engaging with key stakeholders, including First Nations, scientists, tech companies, universities, conservation groups, and fishing communities to gather support for a global moratorium on deep sea mining. So the plan is to travel by train or by boat from Alaska in the north to the south of Chile in the next year. So and then to gather support to rally support for global moratorium on deep sea mining, and we would take a declaration which we would get these entities to sign that we meet along the way, and we would take that declaration back to the International Seabed Authority, stating in no uncertain terms that there is no social license to mine the deep sea. And why Alaska to Chile? Because the Pacific Ocean will be ground zero for mining. As I mentioned, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, that's an area that sits between Hawaii and Mexico. And so the communities along the Pacific coast, they have a vested interest in protecting their backyard. And the idea is to really talk to communities. So whether they are fishing communities in Alaska that are fishing for salmon or for pollock, or whether they are kelp farmers or kelp scientists, or conservation groups, for example, in Central America that are trying to preserve and protect corals, connecting their patch of the ocean to the deep sea. Because at the moment, the deep sea is considered like an alien world. It's like Mars. And people, it's very hard. As I was saying at the beginning, we protect what we love and we love what we know. And as long as we don't know about the deep sea and how it relates to the things that we do know, we're not going to protect it. So for example, has anybody here heard of the vaquita? It's a porpoise. It's a type of, it's a cetacean, it's a type of dolphin that lives off the coast of Mexico. And there's only 10 specimens left in the world. So they're really on the cusp of extinction. And there's a lot of effort going into, for example, into preventing its extinction, so conserving it. But the vaquita lives on the edge of the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. So what's the point of protecting the vaquita if you're going to go trash the habitat right adjacent to it? Or the blue whale. The blue whale is the world's largest animal, and that swims along the coast. For example, Baja California. People can maybe relate to the blue whale, but they may not know how the deep sea impacts the life and the habitat of that blue whale. So understanding how their patch of ocean relates and connects to the deep sea is so important for people to start caring about the deep sea. So for 20 years, I've been campaigning against overfishing and excessive and destructive fishing. And the industrial fishing complex have been a sort of nemesis for me and vice versa. And last summer, I got a call from the Pelagic Freezer Trawler Association asking me to explain why they should be worried about deep sea mining. And so this was a breakthrough, because we are now allies in this fight, because deep sea mining is going to impact all of us. We know from qualitative studies that deep sea mining is going to impact fisheries. So this is a big deal economically for many of these, for many fishing associations. So the idea is really to connect those stories along the coast to the deep sea. And our entire journey will be chronicled on YouTube and amplified by our ambassadors from the music, art, and sports worlds. Preventing the next disaster from starting is one of the biggest levers of hope that we can offer people around the world today that are feeling helpless about the climate crisis, about the multitude of crises we face today, the nature collapsing, the climate crisis. But this is something we can actually unify and we can actually rally around. We've done it with Antarctica. We have an Antarctic treaty in place. And what's beautiful about this campaign is that we're talking about our global commons. We're not imposing on anybody's sovereignty. We're not telling a country what to do, but we are saying, hey, the high seas belong to all of us, and we must protect it. So, and whether you are a fisherman or First Nations or living away from the ocean, the high seas belong to all of us. So for the Ocean Hope Project, we have some great partnerships that we're developing. For example, we have support from Earth%, which is a climate foundation powered by the music industry, as well as with leading sailors such as Team Malazia of the Ocean Race. In fact, they invited me here to New York to speak at the German mission to the UN last week. For those that don't know, it's an ocean race week here in New York. And so a fleet of sailing boats actually left France a few weeks ago and have been doing all kinds of events in New York this week. And actually today they set sail back to, they raced back to France. And so Team Malazia, they're one of the teams that want to work with us on this campaign, because I find it really important that we engage not just the conservation and the scientists, but really also the art, music, and sports world, so that we can really tap into different audiences and bring everyone on board. Brian Eno, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a producer in the music industry, a legend, musical legend. He is personally supporting the Ocean Hope Project. And we literally cannot do this without support. And normally with a campaign, there's time to rally funds, rally support, and so on, but not with deep sea mining. We have 1 year to make a difference. So if you have ideas for partners, then please let me know. Please get in touch. But also, if you want to learn more about deep sea mining and the threats posed, I recommend a short film, Into Deep. You've probably seen it going by, The True Cost of Deep Sea Mining. It's only 18 minutes and it's on YouTube. In there, we talk to scientists. We also talk to, for example, BMW to get that business perspective about why we don't need minerals from the deep sea. So there's a QR code you can scan. So coming back to the high seas and the new treaty, as of today, 5 countries have ratified the new treaty for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And we need 60 countries to ratify the treaty for it to come into force. And whilst we should not let deep sea mining begin at all, we should certainly not even consider mining the high seas until the treaty is in force and has been up and running for several years, so that, we can measure or see how effective this new treaty is going to be. Because otherwise, what's the point of negotiating for 20 years a treaty that cannot adequately address the issues of our time? And this treaty is not just important for deep sea mining, but for all future activities that may develop on the high seas. And what makes the high seas so exciting to me, apart from the fact, that they make up half our planet, is that there's so much yet to discover in the high seas. It's like exploring a whole new world. And as we innovate and the blue economy takes off, I believe we will be seeing a lot more activity happening on the high seas. With population growth and diminishing land availability, including land loss due to climate change, we will increasingly look to the ocean. It is very likely that we will start to occupy the ocean, the high seas, whether it's beneath the waves or on the waves. Imagine floating cities at sea, underwater research stations, resupply centers, all at sea. And therefore, it's important that as we enter this world, that we enter this world with caution, armed with knowledge and good governance structures. Most of the treaties that we see today were negotiated in the last century. They do not consider the biodiversity and climate crisis. They do not consider feminine perspectives, indigenous perspectives, traditional perspectives. They are unfit for purpose. And with the high seas, we can get it right. We can ensure that the treaty governments have spent most of this century negotiating is swiftly ratified and entered into force. We then must ensure that the treaty takes precedence over archaic instruments. And it is exciting to know that this new treaty does consider traditional and indigenous knowledge and gender equality, but for now, these are just words, and the proof will be in the implementation of this treaty. And I'll just end with a few words about my book, The Ocean and Us, which was already referred to. This book explores all the ways our lives interact with the ocean and provides suggestions for what everybody can do to help the ocean. And I actually pulled it together during the pandemic because I was asked so many times by people, where can I learn about the ocean? And rather than refer them to hundreds of scientific papers or different NGOs, or I thought, well, why don't I tap into the network that I have and compile something that is easy to access, easy to understand. So it covers everything from the role of fish in the carbon cycle to shipping, overfishing, marine animal welfare, noise pollution, ocean tourism, the aquarium trade, the deep sea, and emerging topics such as the blue economy, gender in the ocean, and so on. And it brings together the expertise of over 35 ocean specialists and 32 informative and inspiring chapters, each written, as I said, in easy to follow language. And specifically, we have 3 chapters because each chapter is also written by a woman. This is not something that that I talk about, but I do like to mention it. But it wasn't sort of when we have a book written by, for example, a book about sharks written by 5 authors, we don't say, "Oh, this book is written by men." But it is quite unique because it's the first time that there is such a volume where every chapter is written by an ocean expert, and they all happen to be women. So I hope my reflections have offered you some insights about the ocean and hopefully piqued your interest to learn more about our blue planet, really the heart of the ocean to me and to all of you is the heart of our planet. And yeah, I hope you'll support the Ocean Hope Project and share it widely with your networks. And I hope we can have a bit of a discussion or answer questions or yeah, about deep sea mining or high seas, whatever. Thank you.